bekannt. Ein im Atlantik operierender deutscher Flottenverband unter Führung des Flottenchefs Admiral Lütjens stieß im Seegebiet um Island auf schwere englische Seestreitkräfte. Das Schlachtschiff Bismarck hat hierbei einen englischen Schlachtkreuzer, wahrscheinlich Hood, vernichtet.
Hello and welcome to my Model Corner project number 14 and the third in our series of viewer-requested model builds. The Deutsche Kriegsmarine Battleship Bismarck is arguably the most famous surface warship in Germany's history. So this kit has been in my garage since 1999, and by opening up this box, we are unlocking a bit of a time capsule. This should be a nice diversion from our usual aircraft builds. When I first started out model building as a kid, I did cover a variety of genres, but I began focusing primarily on World War II and modern warships. I drove my family mad as they would often come upon large naval fleets sailing across the living room carpet ready to do battle with any opposing force. Also on hand is the gold medal models photo etch I purchased for 3 ship kits including the Bismarck. We can note from the faint postmark it was sent to me on July 24, 1998. In a way, our Bismarck model has been over 20 years in the making. When I briefly restarted model building in the late 1990s, I naturally gravitated toward naval ships, which I still have in my shelves. Let's look at those to establish a baseline of past efforts when compared to our upcoming Bismarck undertaking. First, we have the Tamiya USS Missouri, which just happens to be the very first model I ever used an airbrush on, used photo etch, and tried my hand at rigging. It has been allowed to suffer years of raining dust on the shelf. Next, appropriately, is the HMS Prince of Wales, which of course duked it out with the Bismarck. Finally, we have the IJN Yamato. All three are clean versions of these vessels, so they are really desktop models where no attempts were made towards realism. Let's begin with the single-piece bathtub hull. As you might be able to see, we have a bit of a head start. The light seam line has already been partially sanded down from way back when. We just need to clean it up a little bit. Also already completed in the past is the drilling out of the portholes. This makes for a cleaner appearance rather than dabbing on a circle of paint. It also affords the option of internal lighting. There is a small gouge just ahead of the propeller shaft region, so we'll just add some putty to fill it in. We have a few options for the outer appearance of our battleship. The most interesting is the Germans' use of deceptive camouflage markings and insignia on the main deck. Much of this was painted over just a few days before the Bismarck began Operation Rhine. Also, as the Bismarck was trying to retreat to France, it is reported that the tops of the main gun turrets were painted yellow, probably to make the ship more recognizable to the Luftwaffe. So let's go with the camouflage scheme as well as the deck markings and other regalia to make this vessel historically accurate to that time period. In preparation, we'll need to work elements of the superstructure so that we can properly align our camo patterns between the hull and the deck housings. Starting with the Untersbrücken deck, we can see the portholes were also previously drilled out here. We'll clean the edges and construct the walls and ceiling. At this point, we'll strategically glue some parts of the decks together and leave others loose for ease of adding photo etch components and painting. After sanding away a rectangle representing a door, we can add a brass watertight one from our gold metal PE set. Using a curved hobby knife edge and cutting on a glass sheet, the part can be readied for attachment. Now, using an applicator, we dab on cyanoacrylate glue and then affix and align our door. In a similar fashion, we continue building each deck, drilling out portholes and adding photo etch parts where required. For the funnel, we'll drill and cut out these side gratings to replace with photo etch parts. Likewise, we remove the cast plastic on the smoke exhaust port to replace with a photo etch grill.
Stolz marschieren wir zu drei, geradeaus in langen Reihen, frisch und froh mit Sang und Klang, die ganze Kompanie. Wenn's ein Lied am Fenster steht, liegt im Taschentüchlein weh, das macht Laune und dann lacht die ganze Kompanie. Hussassa, tiralala, die ganze Kompanie, ach ja. Hussassa, tiralala, die ganze Kompanie. Mädel, suchst du einen Mann, schau dir die Soldaten an. Einer ist bestimmt für dich in meiner Kompanie. Fang am rechten Flügel an, prüfe bis zum letzten Mann. Und dann sagst du, mir gefällt die ganze Kompanie. Hussassa, tiralala, die ganze Kompanie, ach ja. Hussassa, tiralala, die ganze Kompanie.
Let's give our decks and other assemblies a coat of the black shading. While we do that, let's also continue the story on the hunt for the Bismarck. As with any wartime event, many facets including mistakes, brilliant moves, chance occurrences, and other subplots cannot all be recounted during this model build, so these are just some of the highlights. Going out of our comfort zone, we have an AK interactive paint set formulated especially for German naval vessels. Immediately, I noticed that the mixture coming out of the airbrush was very thin and sprayed on very wet, yet it managed to clog the nozzle a couple of times. Also, we find that the deck color is much too bright for our project. This is not going to work, and in order to salvage this, we can attempt to use this as a primer coat and modulate with another color. That's better. We'll remove the bland monochrome nature of this paint job once we get to the wash detailing of the decks. We can add the bow and stern deck insignia by airbrushing in the three colors now, starting from the lightest to the darkest pigments. This sequence will take a little bit of custom template work, and we must also ensure proper alignment of all the elements. We note that the symbols are not angled in a stylized fashion, but rather the whole of it is perpendicular to the long and short axes of the battleship. Once these homemade templates are on, we can add the final paint layer of our emblems. That was a little rough. If you're not overly ambitious about these additions, decals are definitely worth considering. We'll simply hand brush in our paint for the various deck outcroppings. To bring out the plank detail, we'll lightly scuff the raised lines with a sanding stick as an initial building block towards our overall deck detailing. Let's add color to our main gun turrets with the lighter gray on the front and sides, and then the darker gray on top. Putty is often used to create the blast bag coverings on ship models. However, small rectangular strips cut from a lint-free fabric sheet can be used. A hole is created just below the center, and we rely on friction to hold the strip in place as we slide it down the barrel, then add a little water to make it more flexible. Using a hobby knife, we gently pack and shape the piece around the barrel base. Finally, we add white glue diluted with water to harden our blast bags. The original plan was to paint the upper levels that had wooden planks in the same color as the main deck, but there is no molded texture. In a retroactive strategy, we'll add wooden decking. This generic piece was meant for scratch building and not to serve as a veneer. We'll need to cut the piece to shape and then reduce the thickness with sandpaper. Well, it seemed like a good idea at the time. After finishing up our custom enhancements, we paint the remainder of the boards and main deck. For our weathering, we randomly add another brown base paint with various amounts of thinner. The thinner will vary the tone of the new paint as well as reactivate the airbrushed in layers. This will in turn give us additional shades of the tans and browns. As a final step, we apply a coat of the black oil paint heavily diluted with mineral spirits over the entire wooden paneling. The Bismarck spent a lot of time in port prior to its fatal mission. There was a lot of time for the crew to get after rust and corrosion and add paint, so the only area that may have routinely been neglected is at and below the waterline. We'll add some light rusting here with oil paints and mineral spirits. To suggest we pulled this battleship right out of the ocean, let's do some sea salt streaks. We usually cover 48 scale aircraft on this channel, but let's shrink our 1/48 scale F-14 Tomcat down to 350 scale and do a flyby for size comparison. Let's add some rigging. Finally, coming up on the end and about ready to display this battleship at the dry dock. Certainly not the best ship model ever built, but I learned some things and will tackle any future ship kits a little differently based on this experience. I hope you found this entertaining and educational. Take care, and we'll see you later.